Armorican Dreams. A dark mythic fantasy story for moss, stone and steel. Written by Ramsey McGregor. An original by Fantasy Bound. Chapter 1. Winds swept hard upon an autumn night across the coast of Dunberlin, a poor province to the far west of the kingdom of Coromant, lorded by a baron further inland. A baron that people along the coast only knew by name, for seldom did such highborn bring themselves to the cold fringes of Dunberlin to look upon the hardy folk who lived there. Forsooth, the people in this part of the grey-skied, green-shrouded land were an isolated folk. So long as they were left with their peace to fish and forest, and paid tribute to their liege, and did not dare disturb the king's peace, then they would be left alone, free of trouble. But trouble had been brewing across the kingdom. Even in these coastal fringes did travelling bards and peddlers come gaunt and weary-faced with news from across the realm. A rebellion had grown somewhere in the deep south, where old Camelon once existed, before the reigning kingdom of Coromant had destroyed them, and like a festering plague it had spread north. At first, the communal fishermen and sailors dismissed these ghastly tales as an excuse for travellers to garner sympathy with the womenfolk or lighten the men's purses, using woeful tales to excuse the high prices of their trade. But verily, did the hushed rumours become a loud truth. Soldiers, never more than 5 for these parts of Dunberlin, had come thither from the castles to patrol the hitherto wild, empty roads. The people of the coastal villages had become increasingly agitated at the growing news, such as the village of Harpestein, a settlement not really different to the other 4 that lined the coast. But on a grey-blue foggy dawn, 7 nights ago did 2 score of armoured men come hither, their commander demanding ships to sail covertly to the land across the sea, Armorica. A group of sailors, the strongest and fiercest of them, were chosen from the village to accompany the soldiers and ensure safe passage to Armorica, whither they would investigate the rumours of rebel activity. Terrified by the revelation that a land only a day's sail away would harbour such savage brigands stirred the locals of Harpestein, and verily did nearly all experienced sailors volunteer to accompany the soldiers to root out the insurrectionists. A day to the Armorican sea village of Saltmarsh and back, but 7 days hence, and the men, sailor nor soldier, had not returned. With few sailors left in Harpestein, save boys and the elderly, who remained to fish for their families, Harpestein were deciding what must be done. Fiona came to the village tavern where all folk of Harpestein convened, not to solely drink, but to converse and relax amid a liar's tune or a story feigned or true. Fiona walked with a pensive poise as she entered the tavern upon that windy autumn night. The sky a clear array of innumerable stars, the faint green rings to the far north, crossing the starry sky like a full bow. Fiona, being a traditional Greenwichian like most of the folk of coastal Dunberlin, would have marvelled at the sight of such beauty, as she had always done since she were a child. But since each night had passed lately, her mind had been obfuscated from spirituality and wondrous fantasy, and instead she had grown morose and troubled. This was unusual for Fiona, but not unexpected. She was 19 years old and rather lately wed, for in these parts folk married young to survive. Fiona was a comely woman, of long, fair, curly hair that she kept veiled in the Greenwichian fashion, and fairer skin. She had delicate, albeit simple features befitting a peasant class, and dark green eyes. But alas, this night, like the past few nights, her brow was furrowed with trepidations that only dimmed slightly as she entered the tavern, into the warmth of candlelight and the presence of familiar village folk. It smelled of roasted fish, cordial and stews that thankfully blotted out the slightest odour of sweat from the remaining men who had been laboriously working that day. There was a newcomer in the village who had grabbed the attention of most of the patrons in the tavern. Judging by the garish clothes, though tarnished from the elements and by his lute upon his back, he was a minstrel, but no song or joviality came from he. Nay, the bard spoke with a warning voice, speaking to the village of Harpestein huddled within that tavern about what news there was.
It is no longer a border skirmish that the king's men brave. It is total war.
You speak truly, minstrel,
spoke an elderly fisherman, his voice blended with incredulity and worry.
I know it to be truth, for I have seen it. I know not why your liege has not been forthcoming to his subjects about the state of the kingdom, but alas, let me be your herald, good men and women of Harpestein. The kingdom is at war.
No gasps of surprise came from the tavern. Instead, only murmurs of somberness sounded. The minstrel continued.
The rebels have amassed a mighty army, traitors and bandits. According to the druids at Dunberlin Castle, the army has shattered the holds of Frostmarch and sacked Dragon's End.
Dragon's End? Exclaimed one of the patrons. But that's in Drake's Path.
That's just south of here,
said another. A stir of panicked voices subtly buzzed across the room, but were quieted with a hand from Connell, the alderman of the village.
Tell us, young Dougal,
he said calmly.
Is Dunberlin ready?
The minstrel, Dougal, was silent and looked around the room before speaking.
The whole kingdom is under serious threat, my lord alderman. I have seen the devastation upon the settlements of Dragon's End. The men lie butchered with dogs and horses. The children, some dead. Some I believe have been taken by these cursed to become soldiers.
Just as they did in the Winter War, God and gods, remarked a grizzled patron. The bard continued, but with a falter.
The women, forgive me ladies of the tavern, for I must speak plainly, hang naked from the battlements of castles. I ventured through the remains of Monarch, where I escorted a young woman, much fair as you.
Dougal pointed first with a nod of his head and then a hand toward Fiona, who during this time was still at the back of the huddled assembly. She blinked in surprise and felt a little exposed as eyes turned on her as they followed the minstrel's gaze.
Aye, lass, as fair as you, but scarred, branded, beaten and, forgive my words, raped, left with an affliction where she screams in her sleep. I escorted her to Dunberlin Castle. She is in the care of the druids now.
The tavern was ghostly quiet, and Fiona had grown ghostly pale. Oft did bards have a way with words, but this man did not trill his adventure. His face was grave and haunted.
She is not the first I have seen, nor will she be the last, I wager,
he commented, before he turned back to the alderman.
You asked if Dunberlin is ready. The truth is, I do not know. But it's closer than you think. And if they can sack walled towns in Dragon's End and smash the holds of Frostmarch, ever marching northward, then it would be wise to be prepared. Forsooth, 3 nights ago I saw smoke rising from the forest by Redslap Vale, but I dared not venture closer for fear of rebels, goblins, or other lies.
The tavern rose with voices in concern, stirred with fright from the minstrel's tale. He held out his arms.
I do not know, people of Harpestein, and to be frank, I do not believe it would be rebels, not a band of them, less so an army, or the Baron would be out with his men facing them if they were so close, surely.
But how do you know it's not them?
Aye, even a small bunch of the bastards. We don't have the men.
What about the other coastal villages, like Belrick and Pontycrook?
Bah, them lot I wouldn't trust to pass me a flagon of cordial without spitting in it. Not less them heathens in Pontycrook, taking up with them druids now they won't help us godly folk.
Why hasn't the Baron sent our soldiers to stay this time? We're exposed.
They come here. Aye, they will.
Enough, please.
Implored the alderman emphatically.
We cannot begin to make illusory conclusions. However, what we must do is be ready. I will speak with the priest tomorrow, God willing, and make preparations. For the village, for us.
The tavern continued to ebb between discussions and arguments about Harpenstein's defence against the rebels. But after several minutes of speaking with the other women in the tavern and seeing very little conversation besides the impending doom, Fiona decided to head home, but not before she caught up with her friend, Maeve. Like Fiona, she was of similar age, but pregnant with her fourth child. After a brief conversation of the current problem, Maeve changed the conversation.
You see Duncan in there?
What about Duncan?
Fiona said with a sliver of irritation.
Couldn't take his eyes off you in there. Heard him speaking to old Evie about you.
Oh, that lecherous snake. I've refused him twice, in Westlandic and Cornish. Is that a hoormeister of a thing wet behind the ears?
Fiona looked out to the coast upon the shimmering sea.
I'm a married woman, and he will respect that. When Fingal comes back from Saltmarsh, he'll teach that heathen a lesson and throw him back to Belrig.
Maeve was awkwardly silent for a moment.
Fiona, it's been 7 days. Saltmarsh is only a day's sail away.
And?
Maeve did not speak, but her eyes betrayed her thoughts. Thoughts that Fiona found unbelievable.
We should have sailed there to see what's going on 3 nights ago at least.
With what? Fishing boats? These buckets can float along the coast for fishing, but not cross the sea. Not without a good sailor and a player for calm waters. And all our best sailors, along with our best boats, are over in Armorica.
Fiona remained silent while Maeve stood with her, unsure what to say. But after a moment, Fiona continued, her voice softer but resolute.
We need our men back. I need my Fingal back, or we will be slaughtered by these rebels.
She paused with tremulous lips, recalling the vile description of Dragon's End's fate.
Or worse. And I won't feel safe until he is back.
I know, it's been a hard new world to come to terms with. That's why me and some of the other women are leaving to Dunberlin Castle.
Fiona spun her head around to face Maeve with a surprised look.
What?
Maeve nodded and gripped Fiona's hand softly with both of hers.
Connell and the priest have been sending letters to the other villages, to send the women and children to Dunberlin Castle from the coasts, to seek safety behind the Baron's walls. I'm with 3 bairns and 1 in the way. My man is somewhere with yours in Saltmarsh, and though I pray for his return, I cannot stay here. And neither should you, sister. Come with us. It's a 3-day journey, but I've heard the convoy will be protected and provisioned.
Dunberlin Castle?
Muttered Fiona, her brow furrowed.
Aye, we'll be safe there, and they'll be good behind those walls. You loved the castle when we used to go with our lads. You were so oft at the Terran Market Square, I wondered if you shouldn't just open a stall yourself.
Tomorrow, you say?
Aye, it'll be here by noon from Belrig.
Fiona was silent as she looked at Maeve, to which Maeve blinked and asked,
You'll come?
Fiona smiled kindly.
It's a lot to take in. I'll think about it tonight.
Maeve, sensing Fiona's hesitance, spoke earnestly.
It's a woeful time we live in. Just as our mams and pas lived through the last war, we'll need to be as strong as them. If your Fingal and my cattle come home, they'll find us.
Fiona smiled sweetly back and said,
Good night, Maeve.
And with good parting the 2 women left back to their homes. Maeve would return home to find her 3 children, her little brother and her mother. Her home on the outer fringes of the village, further inland, was a small cottage like most of everyone's in Harpenstein, and would be a hubbub of familial noise. Fiona did not need to walk far from the tavern to reach her own home, which stood only a rowboat's length away, facing the Armorican Sea. It was slightly bigger than the others, though nonetheless still held the same look, stone-walled and wooden-roofed, laden with hay from the farms to keep the heat in, for even in the short grey summers these lands were cold and fraught with rain and hail. As she entered, she felt the silence first, as always. Aye, it was warm enough. She'd got a small fire going in the centre of the hut, where atop it hung a small cauldron around a crucible. A fish and mushroom stew had been slowly boiling and by now was ready to eat. But Fiona had no appetite. Her mind hungered instead for ruminations. Unlike Maeve, Fiona didn't have anyone. Her ma had told her that her pa had died before she was born during the end days of the Winter War, when the now extinguished Southern Kingdom deigned to conquer the lands of Coromand. Fiona was not alone in the world. Not entirely. She had an older sister and 3 older brothers, 3 half-brothers and 2 half-sisters. Her ma had remarried a merchant from Dunberlin Castle, and they had moved south for warmer days, along with her half-siblings. Her older brothers were all married and scattered across Dunberlin, living their own lives. Her sister Cerria was also close by, but they had never really got on. Cerria was obsessed with marrying a knight, and oft she had journeyed to tourneys to bat her eyelids and flaunt her simple beauty before a squire or errant. Cerria had dreams of being a lady, and was not fond of being reminded of her serf-like origins as a fisher's girl from the edge of nowhere. Alas, Fiona had been content in Harpestein, for she had found herself enamoured with Fingal, a local lad whom she had grown up with, and just as she had flowered into a pretty lass, he had grown into a strong boar of a lad. And indeed was Fingal strong, serious, and carried a tender emotion that he showed only her. He made her feel special, and she made him feel likewise. Long dark brown hair and a thick drooping moustache, his ruddy strong face, broad frame, and powerful arms made him a strapping young lad to make many a maiden swoon for him. But he had promised himself unwaveringly to Fiona, and for several weeks since their marriage life had been bliss. He was a skilled sailor, and oft did he do trade with the villages along the coasts of Dunberlin and, to a lesser extent, Armorica. The latter was a land that had an ill reputation for superstitious, strange people that birthed fairy tales to spook children on the mainland. But Fingal, like most of the other sailors of Harpestein, were always the voice of reason. "There are no shades or fiends that haunt the Armoricans. Just a devil's greed when it comes to haggling Cornish wool." Fiona smiled at the thought of him, while she began to sup from her stew by the fire. On their first days of marriage, Fingal had been quick to expand Fiona's home into the size it was now, for together they dreamed of having many children. They had even discussed names and the likeness of them, even though Fiona was not pregnant. Though her mind dove through mirthful memories, her demeanour in her hut was a troubled one. What if he was stranded there, in Saltmarsh? What if there had been a disaster at sea? What of this? What of that? What if he were to return tomorrow and find his Fiona gone? Her thoughts then delved into anger. Anger towards the village. Yes, now the men had gone over the sea. The village was mostly old and very young, and a small cluster of men who had reasons for not going, like Duncan the merchant, or the whoremaster, Fingal had called him. Duncan was a wealthy merchant who delivered and sold wools on behalf of peasant farmers, but was known for having a weakness for the women of the night when he visited Dunberlin Castle. More to it, he was a pagan convert, now worshipping the Mother. And he had been salivating for Fiona ever since the sailors hadn't returned by the 3rd night. The man thought that money could buy her. Fiona let out an audible sound of disgust, just thinking about that wiry, pallid-faced, crow-nosed man, and went to think about Fingal once more, but instead found herself thinking about the future, which was marred by dark thoughts of the impending invasion. Being in Harperstein meant that news came slow and with gossip. But this war was no bard's story, and the sincere minstrel who had been too shaken about what he'd seen yonder south had in turn shaken her, especially when he pointed her out in his account of the brutalized women. There were too many stories following the minstrels about what the rebels were doing. The villages were riled up, old and young. The castles were falling to these savages. Nowhere was safe, even Dunberlin Castle as Maeve had promised. And the smokes at Red Slap? Fiona's mind was spiraling into a paranoid flux. Losing her appetite to the fear, she quickly got up to the door and stood by it, drinking in the sudden icy fresh air of the sea, and listening to the wafting ocean waves. Peace washed over her, and she felt calm once more. This was the third night she had begun to fall into these damning thoughts, where devils puppeteer dark premonitions before her. She repeated a prayer to the Creator to calm her, and verily her mind felt at ease once more. She sat there that night, just outside her home, looking out to sea. Her thoughts were no longer what-ifs, but what she would do. Would she follow Maeve and her company to Dunberlin Castle? Would she stay here? Maybe Fingal will return, and she was just being a silly mare to think so poorly of her man, or... I will find him, Fiona said to herself. The thought of it, mad as it must be, had slowly been forming in the undercurrent of her ruminations. Armorica was only a day's sail away. The night was calm, and the waters calmer still, almost inviting. She knew how to row a boat, and had seen it done since she opened her eyes. The folk of the village were too scared, but Fiona knew that if the roles were reversed, Fingal would swim across the sea to find her. Moreover, Fiona knew where Saltmarsh was, well, generally. It was apparently directly northwest from Harperstein, and again the waters this night were quiet, with no cloud in the sky, only the silvery moon and the northern green rings above. Her mind at once became as focused as a sailor. It felt good to feel proactive in the face of so much uncertainty for a change. Quickly, she took some spare clothing, heavy wools, cotton and hide, then some provisions. The stew would not be durable, but she bagged some bread, buns, vegetables, and dried salted fish she had stored away. She took also a water skin filled with water that she'd bought from a travelling water seller a day back. What if there were dangers, however? Fiona bridled at the thought, but then quickly steeled herself, her courage renewed. She took a dagger and equipped herself with a short bow and a quiver of arrows. All women in Coromand were trained in archery, not for combat necessarily, but as sport and hunting for food. This was a skill that became especially prevalent during the Winter War, when readily available food and fighting men became scarce, and had since remained a pivotal custom. She herself had enjoyed hunting rabbits and deer in her early pubescent years. She had been lucky not to run into elves or kobolds like some of the other villagers, who had brought such forest folk back as kill trophies. Fiona felt slightly foolish and proud at the same time. She felt like she was going to war. If she found Fingal, or even arrived at Saltmarsh, would they laugh at her? I don't care, Fiona swiftly thought. I'm going to find Fingal. Maybe I'll find them all. Maybe I'll be a hero. A warrior queen like the ones mentioned in the Green Holy Book. In her mind, it was not entirely a humorous idea. Fiona was serious. For 7 nights, drawing into the 8th, had she felt nothing but nervousness, confiding with the other women and trusting others when she didn't even trust herself. Lastly, after donning her cloak, a liver-blue drapery with a brooch in the shape of a crescent moon that Fingal had had smithed and jewelled for her before their wedding, she lastly took her Greenwichian amulet, a wooden trinket hewn in the shape of a tree, symbolic of the Greenwichian faith. Such an amulet was said to have power to rebuke the charms of evil spirits and garner protection from the 12 prophets and the saints of old. Apparently, a copy of the Green Book could offer even more power to the carrier, but that was tucked away in the village temple. Besides, only the priests could read it, unlike Fiona, who, like the rest of the village, if not the entire country, couldn't read at all. Fiona, well and truly packed and armed, stepped out from her hut once again, with a little less confidence than before. What was once a formulation of foolhardy thoughts was now halfway to reality. She was really going to do this. The village was silent and completely dark. Even the tavern, which was usually the last house to dim, was lost in the night. The only light left came from the stars above and the full moon. Even the rings above to the far, far north offered little illumination, just presence. That was enough for Fiona. The lunar light welcomed her to the sight of a cluster of small fishing boats anchored or tied to the wooden quay and boardwalks further along the village. Fiona whispered a quick prayer to God, pulled her hood up, and began her walk to the quay. Chapter 2. It was morning when Fiona, completely exhausted, finally let go of the oars and unfurled the sail to let the wind carry her onward. Her hands were red, calloused and showing the signs of skin torn from the rowing. Her arms ached and she dug into her bag to pull out some dried fish to eat. The rush of stealing, or borrowing, she had told herself, the boat, as well as the rush of adventure, had been excellent motivation to sail her away from Harperstein. The thrill of her nocturnal campaign and the feeling of freedom she felt out at sea had been sufficient to maintain her energy through the night. And by dawn, when Harperstein became naught but a thin line along the horizon, she felt the sudden loneliness upon the calm grey waters. The sound of the wafting waves was certainly calming, and she thanked the merciful God above for it, for such kind seas were uncommon. She felt the direction of the winds blow her loose curly hair westward. She knew Saltmarsh was northwest, but if she was going west, she was sure it'd be a walk from where she'd land to venture onward by foot. Indeed, at least I would be on land, she thought dreamily. Though liberating it was to be free out at sea, it had grown rather quickly to become a lonesome experience. As morning waned and the sky greys cleared a pale blue sky, Fiona ate a lunch in silence before singing to herself, at first Greenwichian hymns, but then into tavern ditties to lighten her mood. By noon she realized she was getting very tired. She hadn't slept for a day and a bit. Alone at sea, she slowly realized the danger. What if there were sirens and kelpies swimming beneath, waiting for her to sleep, or luring her to enchanted slumber before snatching her into their watery world? Or pirates, seafaring rebels. Oh. To distract herself, Fiona began to row again, but without the rush of excitement and adventure, and she did not row for long. Instead, as the afternoon blossomed into a calm blue sky that promised calm waters but no warmth, and seeing as Armorica could still not be seen, Fiona's eyes drooped and her breathing became one with the ocean, and she fell into a gentle slumber. Chapter 3. If only her dreams were as gentle. Much of her dreams were as lost and fast as they were conjured, just a blur of altered experiences. But after a messy myriad came forth a vivid sight, like nothing she'd ever dreamt of before. And the way it pulled her dreams from forgetful bliss, it felt invasive. She was on her little boat, and it was night. the waters very calm. And yet she felt unnerved. The more she lingered, the more she realized what it was that made her dream self feel a sudden soulful dread. For indeed it was night, quiet, cloudless, an open sky, but starless, moonless, ringless, a black sheet. Yet the waters reflected a dark orange light, and the waters themselves were a calm dead. No waves wafted, not even a ripple. Just her, on a boat before an empty void. She could not bring herself to gaze long at the black curtain above the water. There was an invisible yet omnipotent pressure that made her scared. It felt as though a cosmic phenomenon, alive and unknown, was looking back at her from beyond. The rising feeling of fear from glowering, threatening eyes, though invisible, suffused her with dread. She did not want to be here anymore. She wanted this dream to end, and yet it would not. She looked around, but as she glanced at the waters to peer beneath it, she found that she couldn't. This whole plain scared her. The feeling of an unknown alien land, and even more, an unknown entity of ethereal alien grandeur, made her feel exposed. All of a sudden, this living void of warped existence shook violently, but without a sound, and Fiona, spooked, felt herself curl into a ball, terrified. Then all-consuming black. And then, the sound of someone talking. Nothing coherent, just words, sounds, fading away to a distant chorus. Fiona fluttered her green eyes open and pulled the hair from her face to the dying light of an evening sky, an array of oranges casting pink and blue clouds, as she sat up from her slumber, feeling very thirsty and parched. She glanced around to take in her surroundings. A muddy, swampy mere amid small stalagmites surrounded by pine forest that promised steep, wild dells. An environment she had never seen along the coast of Dunberlin. She was in Armorica. She was certain of it. And as she'd expected, she had landed away off from Saltmarsh. Brushing the dark, disturbing dream eagerly away, she stood up with a tired, driven wobble. Fiona grabbed the oars to swim the boat out of the mere, but found she couldn't. The oars were stuck in the mere's mud. She went to yank one of them with both hands, but after several attempts she found it futile, and her energy completely depleted. Alas, she got up from the boat, and realizing the mere was treacherously soft like quicksand, she gingerly hopscotched the smoothest protruding rocks until her feet eventually landed upon the leafy bramble and soft earth of the forest, keeping herself on its fringes, for the forest was of pine and little light showed within. The darkness promised by the pine forest made her swallow with a growing regret. Chapter 4. Night fell slowly, with a starry sky blotted with clouds that passed across the moon high above. The icy air and cold, strong winds kept Fiona pertinent in her trek north, where she hoped she'd find Saltmarsh, or at least a trail, a sign, anything that would lead her towards civilization. Currently, she was feeling slightly foolish and tired as she trekked between forest and coast, keeping her sight away from facing the woods, for the oppressive blackness that stared back made her mind conjure even the most banal of fairy tales into a frightfully real possibility, waiting to snatch her. So instead, she spoke to herself, recounting past conversations and scripting future ones also. Sometimes she sang prayers and ditties to enchant herself into a finer mood, but even those fell silent as her feet began hurting. Like most people on the coast, if not all rural Coromant, People like Fiona wore fur boots, wooden clogs, or simply went about bare. Only well-to-do folk, like highborn, could afford the good shoes like leather or linen. Clogs would certainly ache, and barefoot was an option if her fur boots got drenched with water. But no soul could ease the gradual pain of this never-ending trek. Fiona was tired and already feeling slightly defeated. She slowed and slung her backpack from her shoulders to take out some bread buns and her water skin. Fiona spoke a quick but meaningful prayer to the Creator and the 12 before supping. Before she could take a bite, she froze and eyed the forest with wide-eyed suspicion. A sudden fright came over her. She fled a few feet from the forest and crouched by a small ledge facing the coast behind her, already feeling hunted and small. She had seen something in the darkness of the forest, a flicker of something, a light that had danced before her periphery. Fiona let out a shaky breath, and her mind raced with ideas. But after a swelling silence, she gingerly peeped her head up. There it was again, a flicker of a swinging glow that was amber and bright before it vanished once more. A lantern? A bullseye lantern from what Fiona could fathom by the way it moved? Thrice more it came back, and this time it did not dim. Instead, it grew brighter. It came closer, and Fiona shrank with crippling suspense. Perhaps a woodsman? Maybe a patrol? Or maybe pirates, rebels, or a simple madman. Eventually, out from the woods came the bearer of the lantern, accompanied by 2 others illuminated by the moonlight. All 3 were diminutive, squat-bodied, flat-faced, darkly skinned, and thickly bearded. They were hooded and drab in tattered rags. Fiona held her breath from sudden realization. Dwegar. She had heard of such creatures many times, but never seen them. Devious dwarfs from the deep, who forever sought to lure people out into their dark, secret world, for what purpose she never wanted to know. As soon as she'd seen their features revealed by the dim lunar light, she had rashly ducked her bonny head and placed her back to the ledge, her body rigid with fear, and the sudden realization of her folly venturing into Armorica alone. She dared not breathe. Had the Dwegar noticed her? Oh, God and prophets above, she thought. I might die. The waves a few feet before her were noisy and violent, and yet she could hear their footsteps breaking twigs and bramble, stepping closer, dangerously closer. Fiona's eyes nearly popped out from the speed of her heart racing, before she made a sudden and instinctive decision. She leapt from her hiding spot and backed away from the ledge, facing the forest, where the 3 dwarf men stood. They didn't look surprised. Despite their surreal appearance, Fiona could see they had a dangerous look in their dark brass eyes, like starving dogs finding a bone with a sliver of meat. Fiona was quick to take her bow, nock and draw an arrow, aiming it at the 3 dwarfs.
Stay back! Get away from me!
She shouted, backing away.
Fiskir manditar bolaika metwegar karagan.
What?
Fiona exclaimed, before drawing tighter upon the string of her bow.
Onarelgi, Honskane
And the other 2 chuckled mirthlessly, grinning darkly with wolfish delight. They were moving now with caution, slowly towards her, already by the edge of the ledge. They were illuminated by the moon glow, giving her perfect sight of all 3 of them, lantern aside. Fear overrode all else, and with a prey's foolhardy wit, she loosed her arrow at the middle Dwegar. The arrow struck true and fast, too fast for the Dwegar to react. It shot right through the right eye of the middle dwarf, dropping the lantern, grabbing his face, and screaming in pain as black blood trickled madly from his punctured eye socket. The 2 other Dwegar bridled and wavered momentarily as Fiona quickly knocked another arrow and sidestepped away from the Duergar, who were not as confident as they were before. They did not move. They just glared malevolently at her as they grabbed their injured partner, the latter pointing where Fiona had once been, his tongue becoming slurred and his voice breaking as he bent over, more blood gushing from his face. The other two started to move toward her, but instead Fiona growled and shouted back at them, aiming her bow shakily. They stopped moving, even as Fiona backed herself into the forest and instantly went into a darting sprint further in, trying hard to conceal herself from these vagrant creatures as far and as quickly as possible. She ran ever further and deeper into the pine wood with complete abandon. She let her legs fly into the dark until it became a rhythm of speed and breath. Until she tripped. A fallen branch, long and firm enough to cause her balance to dither, and after a wobbly attempt to rebalance herself, her coordination fell apart, and she in turn tumbled like a ragdoll down a sloping dell amid dry-leaved bramble and earth. When she had landed at the base of the dell, where she could hear a small stream trickling by, she let out a scream of pain as a sudden shot of agony blasted from her right ankle. Unable to stifle the immensity of the pain, she gritted her teeth. Growling her anguish away, she dumped her hide boots off to look at her ankle. No immediate injury, she was thankful. She was no cleric, but she surmised that it was sprained pretty badly. She slid herself closer to the stream and gently placed her injured foot within, the cool water soothing at first, leaving the pain to be a pulsing, moody thrum. Despite the immediate danger withering away from her heart, she felt no peace, for the forest was black, black as a dreamless sleep, and quiet. Once more her mind began to imagine what could be around her. But she thought back to the fight. Did I do something wrong? She thought to herself. She had killed deer and pheasants many times before, and had never felt remorse, for that was a manner of survival, to eat. But then again, this Duergar, he or it, had threatened her. She could not understand it, but it didn't need to speak to reveal its intentions. The eyes of all three of them, evil, drag her away into the deep bowels of dark earth to never see the light of day again. The idea of being denied the holy gift of God's light, to have her back bent and lashed and toil away for the rest of her life, terrified her. Before a strange thought quickly consoled it.
I should have killed you all,
she suddenly said out loud. What? She thought to herself. Such an unnatural thing for her to think, let alone say. But when it came from her lips like a fleeting arrow, it had felt cathartic, pleasurable, like a moment of release. And yet, the more she thought on it, this aberrant moment, the more it made sense to her. They were bad creatures. They weren't even human, so what did it matter? They would not tarnish her soul to reach the heavens. God knows what's in the heart of us all, she thought, and I merely defended myself from creatures of the deep and hells. Her mind eased, but she did not sleep. Instead, Fiona rested her eyes lightly and found herself travelling amid thoughts of gloom and darkness. She felt sudden rushes of anger and a growing urge to return to the coast and hunt those dwarfs. Hunt them, hurt them, kill them, mangle them. She envisioned the Duergar she shot in the eye, dragging it into the woods, into a little hole she'd make for herself, and committing unspeakable acts of gore upon it. The idea of the suffering was orgasmic. As the horrifically pleasurable thoughts became too cursed to endure for her humanity, Fiona suddenly opened her eyes, looking about. The sky was lightening to a dark grey blue. Dawn had come at last.